the question is like, how do you become a distinguished engineer? It's like, oh, the answer is simple. Just make things that will shift the direction of how we do things at the industry
Yeah.
level, right? It's really simple, yet like it's really hard to define. And it's like as staff engineer, is like I think one answer is like, how do you become a staff engineer? I think like one way that I like to phrase is like, it's not only contributing at the platform level. It's like, how do you help the company to expand the engineering team, to create more teams, to improve like things on a 10x basis, right?
Today's guest is Thiago Ghisi, Director of Engineering at Nubank. Thiago has had an incredible tech career. Before Nubank, he worked at Apple, Amex, and ThoughtWorks. He's also a deep thinker. He hosts a podcast and constantly shares great advice on X and LinkedIn. So during our chat, we talked about what makes managers successful, career expectations and frameworks, and how to build a great tech career in 2024. Hey Thiago, welcome and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Luca. Thank you for the invite. It's always a pleasure to be talking to you. And
Yeah,
yeah, I love the community. I love everything you do. So a lot of overlap on what I'm continuously researching about and how much I care about career. So I think this is great.
Thank you so much. Pleasure is mine. I'm so happy to have you on the show. First of all, because we even met in person in Rome about 1 year
Yes.
ago. We had a great chat. And we also ran a community event in the past where we explored so many great insights and ideas of yours about good engineering careers, what makes engineers and managers successful. So it's great to explore again these topics. And I want to open with an observation. That is, we have run recently a survey on the newsletter about engineering productivity. So what makes engineers, managers, and people in tech productive, successful, or unproductive? And it turns out that ICs and managers have quite different feelings about their own productivity and what makes them successful. Maybe unsurprisingly, maybe not, I don't know. So engineers feel like they kind of know what they should do, but they would love more focused time, less interruptions, less context switch. So I think it's all pretty familiar. But for managers, it's kind of the opposite. That is, they feel productive already in the sense that they do many things, but they need more clarity. So they are unsure about what they should focus on. So it's like engineers would like to pedal faster, be less interrupted, while managers feel like they're already pedaling faster, but in a questionable direction sometimes. So does it resonate with you? And why is it hard for managers apparently to figure out what success looks like or what makes them successful?
That's a great question. I think like it depends on so many levels, right? But I mean like I think like I would say the as an engineer, right? Like I think like because most managers, and we're talking about tech managers, engineering managers, managers in tech, right? They all started their career as developers, right?
Yeah.
And they know what productive means from their early days, right?
Yeah.
Productive means you had a good day, you were able to solve big problems, you're able to deliver something, you're able to create something you're proud of, right? Like you're able to contribute to the business in some way, right? To that feature you're developing. Or even it could mean like, oh, you were mentoring someone and you felt that they were able to evolve in some dimension, right? You were able
Yeah.
to solve a production incident, you were able to improve performance, right? A lot of the feedback loops are a lot closer, right? And when you go to the management side, because you're no longer having that dopamine almost hit of like, okay, I got like to solve this, and like you're really into problem solving. You are still into problem solving, but you are into things that are like a lot more delayed and uncertain, right? Like, and so it feels like a lot of the work that you're doing is not gonna be materialized in any like in the upcoming days or weeks. They're gonna take months, if not years, to bring results to the
Right.
team, to the people you work with. But I mean, like in general, we would say, and I think like there is a great book on the topic of management called The Effective Manager, and I don't know if you know this book, but the guy breaks down being a successful manager, not like engineering manager. Manager in general is about delivering results and retaining people, right? At the very, very, very high level, that's all is about, right? In the generic term. So if you're able to deliver what the company needs from you, and if you're able to keep the people that you have without burning them out, and like that is good management at high level. But then if you bring to tech, right? If you bring to engineering, there's a lot more nuance into that, right? And then
Yeah.
the nuances start to vary. What is the stage of the company, right? What is the stage of the chain? Like, what is the stage of the product, right? Like, because like being successful as a manager, it might mean like hire a lot of people. Like, it might mean to have like effective hiring a pipeline, right? In some companies, in
Yeah.
others, it might be about promoting people, not losing them. In
Yeah.
others, it might mean just like getting a crisis under control, right?
Yeah.
So there's so many different definitions, and like the stages of the chain, the company, the culture, the culture you are in, right? Like, is it distributed, is like remote, or is on site, right? Like,
Yeah.
are you using modern technology or using old technology? That all comes to play to the manager success criteria. And I think like a lot of people don't understand like what are they going after in their context, right? I think context is king for to go after the definition of what a successful manager means, right? And what it means to be successful in the context they are at.
Yeah, I think this is a great take. And basically, what you're saying, what it feels to me is that successful software engineers and ICs might look more, similar across different companies than what successful managers look like. Is that correct?
I would say yes. I would say even for ICs, that varies too, right? Like, I mean, if you are on a startup that's trying to prove
Yeah,
product market fit, you're trying to do a lot more things. You're not as careful as scalability concerns. Like, but like, I would say they look more of the same. You're
yeah,
coding, you're shipping code, but management, and I would say like varies a lot more based on the business, based on the context, right? And
yeah,
based on your seniority as a manager too, right? If you're
yeah,
like a first level manager versus your director versus your
yeah,
VP, right? Like how big the organization is plays a big factor. And are you managing other managers? Are you managing ICs? Are you actively hiring and growing a team, or you're more like stabilizing, like restructuring things, right?
yeah. And I love that before you talked about feedback loop, because this is something that we hear often. That is, as an IC, as an engineer, you have uh, inherently a shorter, a closer feedback loop. You just, you develop something, you release it, it works, it doesn't work, the adoption. So you get more feedback about your work more frequently. And it is just harder for a manager. So do you think that it is just a matter of readjusting and developing different systems, different feedback loop for yourself that can be anyway short feedback loop and close feedback loop, even if you're a manager? Or this is like necessary evil? You just have to adapt to the fact that it takes more time to get feedback about your work and figure out how you're doing.
So I don't think is or I think is the end, right? I think like it's
Mm,
both are important, right? Like I think like okay, on one side, I think like finding like ways to close feedback loops, to be able to find problems early on, to be able to get some early feedback if something you did had a positive or not, positive or negative effect. I think those are important, and like you need to like think like as a system, right, on how things are related. Like those are important. But I think there is another part of the equation that is additional off, right? It's not only feedback loop, it's also about like soft skills, a lot of soft skills, right? And things that go beyond feedback loops, right? Like
mm,
is about, I mean, how you communicate, how you see things long term, right? How you're not optimizing for the short term anymore, right? Like how you have to be detached of the problems, right? How you have to think about like sometimes with not what you would do, but what the team is capable of, or what is the compromise that everybody's willing to take, right?
Yeah.
I think being a manager is in so many levels about like delivering results or thinking about like the future of that thing more than like keeping your personal beliefs or personal preference, right? That as an engineer, I think you were able to hold really, I mean, really closely, and like you're able to follow your 100% of what you believe, even though you have to compromise and change in the long term, right? As a manager, your job is going to be to find the compromises, find the people that work well together,
Yeah.
kind of like isolate, almost created those bounded contexts so the team can be successful in the long run. Like who can mentor who, right? Like it's to find those nuances that you don't have to care about as an engineer, right? It's about asking for help. It's about communicating like in advance. It's about helping the team to find a predictable like pace, right, of delivery. And like so I would say yes, it's about feedback loop, and yes, there are some other things that you have to take care about that are completely new to a
Yeah.
manager.
Yeah. So you mentioned basically a totally different set of skills, right? Especially around, I mean, maybe not a totally different. That is, you apply already and some of these soft skills, people skills, communication skills when you're an IC, but the degree to which these matter when you're in a managerial position, it's probably very different, right? So do you think I mean, how should people think about their skills for their professional growth? I mean, when you're when you're an IC, when you're an engineer, you're maybe used to thinking that you can train things like how much you're proficient in some technical thing in your stack. You get better at doing things, so you have a good feedback loop on those things as well. While since the skills that are needed of you change when you're a manager, are those things that you just get better on the job? Are those things that you can improve on intentionally? How has it worked for you, and how do you think it can work for fresh managers, for example?
Yeah, I would say so. As engineers, you said things are a lot. There are a lot more textbooks and checklists, and you get feedback from the compiler. You get
Yeah,
feedback from the performance of what you do. Right. You get feedback about the availability of your system. You get feedback about folks that are reviewing your PRs. Right. Like I think you get explicit feedback in so many ways. As a manager, things are a little bit more subtle. Like. That like, and usually if you don't ask for feedback you're not going to receive, is more the default answer, right? Like as an engineer is like, even if you don't ask you're going to get feedback all the time, right?
yeah,
As a manager it's like, if you don't ask you're not going to get any by default, right? Like, and also I would say the fact that like we know really well what it takes to grow from junior to mid-level to senior, right? But what it means to be a junior manager, what it means to be a mid-level manager, what it means to be a senior manager, right? What it means to be a director. Those are things that are a lot more nuanced and like differ a
yeah,
lot, right? And again, your context will play a big part of that. But like in terms of like how to approach those things, I mean I like a lot the four P's framework that I
yeah,
have written about and shared, like, and initially was the idea for managers to think about their responsibilities and areas they need to master on, right? And I think like, okay, so like you have the platform, you have like the product, you have process, and you have people,
yeah,
and like, but I think like there's a lot more nuance on the people part. I think like, and there's another problem, and that I think we are actually not going. We're doing much better now. Is that in the past, managers were not supposed to be technical. Managers were not supposed to contribute to the architecture. Now we're getting to a point where no, we need engineering managers that are technical, that are able to arc, that are able to help the team to build a solution, they're able to contribute. They're not only facilitators, right? and they will get to the details, and they might have feedback about technical things, and that is what expect of those managers, right? I think we're getting, and I think that is the emphasis on the
Mm.
platform side, on in the product is like you need to understand the business, you need to understand the partners, you need to understand the context where your software, like how your users are using it, because like as an engineer, those things are important to you, but usually you get that more distilled, right? You get that like, oh, here's a user story, you have a PM that is setting direction, right? Like as a manager, you are contributing, you're trying to create the vision, you're trying
Yeah.
to kind of like sell the ideas to the team and like sell the platform work up, right? So I think there's a lot of those skills that's like is less about implementing a task or solving a problem, but like to find the next problems you need to solve, how you sell like the platform work that's going to help things in the long term, how do you help to grow people, right? Like how
Yeah.
do you help to define processes so that like when someone goes on vacation, when someone leaves the company, the team is able to still to keep things running, right? Like there needs to be some standards, there needs to be some like engineering practices that are not like depending on the people you have at the moment, even though the people play a big role in one of your big levers as a manager should be to try to grow your high performers and kind of
Mm.
give them opportunities, stretch them up, like because you know that those are the people that are gonna like move the needle and help you to go to the next level, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know if I answered your question. I was pretty much rambling here.
No, no, but I think it was very interesting, especially I think at the beginning, even when you said that something you're witnessing, maybe if I got it right, is that maybe in the past we could afford to have managers that were not much technical, not much involved into deep into the trenches, but now we are seeing big tech getting kind of leaner and managers getting way more hands on. So in a way, it's like the bar is higher for good
It's
managers to prove their
especially
value.
yeah, they are no longer only people managers, and I feel like they never were in most of the big techs, in most like serious companies. Like they were always the element of engineering that I was expected. But during the periods of high growth, like during the pandemic, a little bit before that, right? There was a lot of people becoming managers, and it's like, okay, you had to do so much hiring. We almost forgot that because there was so much levels of management, right? But now that, as you said, things are getting leaner, and we're trying to find a something that's sustainable for both managers and ICs and the companies in the long term. I think we're seeing like a little bit more responsibilities on the manager side that make a lot of sense to me. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
And how do you think this conversation instead changes for like high level ICs, like staff plus engineers? Because, now we have
yeah.
in many companies dual career tracks. And of course, it's an improvement. We all know that. But sometimes people feel it's still kind of different, hard roles to figure out what it means to be successful as a staff or principal engineer. You have this mix of responsibilities. And the fact that managers are getting more technical maybe brings these roles closer together than they used to be. So, what are the set of skills and the things you need to do to be successful as a high level IC?
I mean, I okay. So I can actually start with the skills that I feel are important, but I
Yeah,
think like the the ambiguity, I would say the fact that those things are so like not clearly defined is not by accident, it's by design, because
yeah,
like the same way you don't have criteria to what do you need to do to be the CEO of Fortune 500, right? There's no such a checklist, right? Or
yeah,
you need to do A, B, and C. There is no such checklist. Like I think like if you go like even higher up, like distinguished engineers, right? Like distinguished engineers are defined as someone has made a contribution that has moved the industry in a new direction, right? I think
mm,
like the example that there is the Jeff Dean, I believe at Google, right? That like
yeah,
he did so many contributions that that like completely shifted like how we do things at the industry level, like map reduce. Like there's so many things that he did that's like, I think the question is like, how do you become a distinguished engineer? It's like, oh, the answer is simple. Just make things that will shift the direction of how we do things at the industry
Yeah.
level, right? It's really simple, yet like it's really hard to define. And it's like as staff engineer, is like I think one answer is like, how do you become a staff engineer? I think like one way that I like to phrase is like, it's not only contributing at the platform level, it's like, how do you help the company to expand the engineering team, to create more teams, to improve like things on a 10x basis, right? Like your job as like, and how are you? You're not only, let's say, solving the problems that you know exist. You're kind of like proactively working on the things that are going to appear in the next 2 3 years. You're helping the managers to figure out the team topologies. You're kind of like,
Yeah.
you're influencing the general managers or the like almost like the C level in some instance, right? Like you're kind of like the same way that like a director is expected to be sell ideas, to kind of think not only on like what are the consequences of those decisions now, but like 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years from now, and expecting to be working ahead of the schedule and thinking long term. And like the staff engineer is the same way. It's like he's not the problem solver, he's like the problem finder, right? Like, and it's
Yeah.
also not only the problem finder, because you see a lot of staff and principal engineers, they love to ask, why are we doing this? Like to really question like super philosophical questions, almost like Socrates, right? Like, and I
Yeah.
think those are not the successful principal engineers. I think like those are the ones that are just kind of like trying to ask harder questions to kind of like to to
Prove they're
show how
smart.
the company doesn't know what they yeah doesn't know what they're trying to do, instead of helping to create the future, helping to create the next platforms, helping picking up big problems that are like affecting everyone, like on the engineering team, like different business units, like depending on how big the company is, and like proposing something that's going to be almost revolutionary at the company side, right?
Yeah.
And that's like a staff, and then like principal, there's like a lot of like, there's some difference there, but it's like I think the difference between senior and staff is huge, because he's almost, in my view, a completely different career ladder. Like is
Mm.
like, I think Tanya Riley has this thing that she says, right? That's like your job as a senior engineer is to build software, right? Your job as a staff engineer is to build orgs that build software, right? Like it's almost like you need to create orgs that are effective, but it's not only creating orgs. You need to kind of be like sponsoring people, so you're growing other people to replace you. Like you are kind of, you recognize that you cannot be on the critical path, right? You're not trying to like review every single PR, like be the one that is in every single possible way. You're relying on people that you know like have more understanding. You're kind of like giving directions at high level. You're trying to sell a vision, right? Like,
Yeah.
and whenever you see a big problem, you're the one that's like, yes, we need to solve this. It's really important. We cannot let this happen. And you take that ownership and you act as a director, almost like crossing the organization, talking to whoever needs. You no longer respond to a manager and it's like almost fixed on a particular context, like a scope. You
Yeah.
kind of, your job is to cross over, to like to build bridges and to find paths, right? It's like whenever there's a trade-off, right? Like, oh, it is stability or performance, right? Like you find like a third dimension to kind of like, we can have both if we do this, right? Like that's what a good staff engineer is. But it's like, it's hard, and it's like there is no recipe to get there. You get there by doing a lot of those things and by getting out of the comfort zone and like having those opportunities too. You cannot have a staff engineer on a super small company startup. It's like
Yeah.
everybody's a staff engineer because everybody's trying to create things, right? I think the staff engineering problem only exists after you cross a certain size. And I think there was a problem that I think we're seeing as an industry, that everybody believes that they need to be a staff engineer to be successful because they look at the ladder and they see like senior, lead, staff, right, principal. But I think like you can be successful, extremely successful as a senior engineer. You can be extremely successful as an engineering manager, even if you are on that position for years, right? You can change companies, you can change like you can change domains, right? Like you can change technology, right? And there are ways to grow even though you're not going to the staff engineering path. That I think like in my view, and I'm repeating myself here, but like staff engineering is almost a different skill set. The same way that it's almost like a lateral move. It's like it's not a continuation of the path, right? It's like I think like after senior, you kind of like you are a lead there. Like staff engineer is like you're working on completely different skills. Your job is not really to be kind of like delivering features, right? Your
Yeah.
job is like to be thinking about things I mean, for the long term.
Yeah, I love when you said that not even in all companies there is a need for such a role and for this kind of work. And it remembers me of a blog post, I think it was by Charity Majors, who said that, okay, you create career frameworks and expectations for the various roles, but it's okay to acknowledge that not all opportunities are available at any given time. Maybe you write down expectations for what a staff engineer needs to do, but then there isn't room for more staff engineers at that company because there is not more kind of that work. So I think sometimes people take for granted that they can just progress indefinitely, in a given company to higher roles, but it depends also
Yeah.
on whether that kind of job and work train is available at any given time.
Yes. And I think like the worst part of this is that people feel that because they're not progressing, they're not moving levels, they're failing or they're not growing, right?
Yeah.
And I think like that is the problem when we look at career letters like linearly, right? When you see things like this level comes after this, like after this, and it's like it's almost as if whoever is one level up is better than you, and like is and I think like that's a problem, especially after like 20 years. Like if you are on, like as a software engineer after 20 years, and if you look at the ladder as, oh, I have to be on the like on the top of that to be kind of like considered successful. I mean, your definition is incorrect, right? Like you need to find other definition of success, and it's like you can be like amazing manager forever, right? As there are people that like are happy as a manager, they don't want to become directors. I had many managers that they would tell me like, I don't want to be a director because I like to work with a small scope. I like to kind of like to have this challenge that I have, and I have it most fun here. And they know what they don't like to do, right? Like, and I think that's like staff engineer is a completely different job, and you might not even like it. Like, it might not be for you, and that's okay, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's hard to tell that when the career ladders, when everybody's like trying to get to the staff level, even if they're not acting as a staff, right? There's another thing is like I see a lot of senior plus plus, right? Is a term that I have been using. Like you're not a staff engineer, you're a senior plus plus. It's like yeah, you have been a senior for a very long time. You have like a history of contributing to multiple fronts of the company, but you're not really acting as a staff. You're acting as a senior on the day to day. You still work on a particular feature. You still kind of like you still don't mentor other folks. You still are not influencing the business. Like yes, you're a pretty good senior, but you're not. That doesn't make you a staff. And like, is the what got you here won't get you there, right? It's like people believe that what they need to get to staff is just what they did to get them to senior, right? And
Yeah.
that's wrong, right? Like, and I actually shared last week on LinkedIn an article I read for HBR about the seven leadership action logics or action mode. Is like you need to go from achiever to be an individualist, from individualist to be a strategist, right? Like, and I think like you actually go from expert to achiever. So you're expert as an engineer and you become a manager. You need to change your mental model to like, okay, now I'm an achiever, right? And you go from a manager to like maybe director, VP. you shift that my job is not only to deliver, is to find what other people need, and is like to adapt to the context, and like to be able to work around even if the you don't agree with the solutions. You do what will work the best, not necessarily just like he's not he's like from um from achiever to individualist is more like not only you deliver on the results, you deliver on the how. It's like how you deliver, right? Like you kind of like, it's not only delivering this project, it's not only solving this big problem, it's how you're able to solve this, like how you're able to work with people, how you're able to
Yeah.
grow others. And it's not only about cutting corners and okay, it's done. It's like, and then from let's say individualist to strategist is like you're like you no longer are looking for mentors. You're kind of like you're trying to find what is the next big problem that we as an industry are facing. You're kind of like you're creating other like you're expanding the business. It's like completely different mindset, right? And I
Yeah.
think like same exactly the same problem applies to engineers. Like if you keep applying the expert action mode or the expert leadership way of doing things, you're not going to be able to be successful as a staff, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's a big shift. It's a completely different way. It's a new paradigm, right? Like, and that's what people don't get, right? But going back to the how to be a distinguished engineer, it's like just do things that change how the industry does things, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to explain, hard to do. And people that were coined as distinguished engineers, they did in completely different ways. There are people that
Yeah.
did via open source projects, the people that did inventing new ways of doing things, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there is
And
not a single recipe.
there's no single recipe. And one thing that I worry is that, of course, the fact that the higher you go through the ranks, the more your impact is dependent on the context you're in, the company, the product, and so you have to get more and more context. The more maybe the harder it is for these people to change jobs at some point. You lose all that context. Is that true? And is that true even on the other side, for companies to hire a staff engineer or a principal engineer? Because, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it is much harder to move companies. It's much harder to like those positions are much rare, right? Like it's not like I think like whenever you get at like one level is like moving companies is a big deal, and because like there are even companies like I think like Amazon, AWS, I believe has a rule that they don't have principal engineers that have not been with the company for at least 3 years, right? You can only be called the principal engineer if you're at the company for 3 years, right? Before
Yeah,
that, you're called something else, right? Like you don't get hired as a principal, if I understand it. You become a principal in that
yeah,
context because they believe that if you are not there for that amount of time, you don't have enough context to navigate the organization. You cannot act as a principal. It's like the same way. It's like
yeah,
it's pretty hard to hire like someone to be a CEO of a company. It's much easier to promote someone that's already executive or someone that's been on the company for years because like they know how to navigate, they know the strengths and weakness, and it's like and as a manager, as director, it's like even harder. Like the opportunities are much smaller, right? And I think like your skill set is also not you're doing things that in a lot of companies they don't even need, right?
yeah,
Like do they need directors on a small like 30 people startup? Like they don't, right? Like it's like a director there would be completely useless if they're not able to play as a manager for a while, if they're not able to go and be a developer and to learn quickly how to be quick, right? As they used
yeah,
to be 10, 15 years back. So it's like it's a big risk, right? Like moving to the management track, it is a big risk for because you whenever you move to be a manager, you are more vulnerable to like company and market movements because the opportunities are much fewer, right? As a
yeah,
senior engineer, if you're kind of sharp, you're kind of like up to date on things and you can deliver things, you can work well with others, right? Like it's much easier to find positions and is like and is a skill set that's always going to be valuable, right? Like in manager,
yeah,
director, VP, SVP, right? Like those positions are not in every single company. And
Is there a
if you,
risk?
yeah,
Do
yeah,
you think is there a risk in those positions like director or staff plus engineers that at some point you're getting better and better at getting things done in that particular company as opposed to getting things done well in general?
yes, yes. I think that is what a lot of people have to optimize for, right? Like I think like what it means to be successful as a director, as a staff, as a principal is kind of like you're able to get things done on that context, right? You're not optimizing for getting things done like across companies, usually not, right? Like you're
Yeah.
really optimizing for that context, and that's what makes you valuable for that company in that moment, right? That's why you're kind of like on that position. But
Yeah.
like because you're doing that for so long, when you lose your job or there's a layoff, you kind of like, and if you move to a company that operates in completely different ways in the company that you work for, you're in trouble because you have to learn, you have to catch up on things that you might have forgotten. That's why I think is a good thing, and that's the thing that I tell all my directs and all my managers, like they should be interviewing every other year, right? Like be taking like interviews with the goal of like my goal is to test myself to see how valuable I am outside the company and to see if I'm able to get another job at the same level or at a higher level or at the same level with a higher pay, right? And you're not doing that because you're hating your job. You're doing that because it's a safety net. It's like almost your insurance, right? Like, and if you have like a contract on the side with a salary that is the same or a little bit better, you know, okay, I'm good. I have insurance here at least for the next 6 months. And if you're not doing that, and I think the mistake that a lot of people make, and even as a senior, right, like they're so like tied to the technology, to the internal
Yeah.
platforms, the language, that whenever they go to test it out themselves, if they're marketable, right?
Yeah.
They kind of like they don't even know what skills they're interviewing. Selling yourself is a skill, right? Like,
Yeah.
and that's why you should be like doing that every other year as a test, right? It's almost as a test. It's an insurance policy to your career. That's the way I see. And it's like it's not about being kind of like almost like someone that is going behind the company and doing shady things. Like you can be super transparent about that, right? Like I'm happy here, but I just want to see what's out there, right? Like your career is not your marriage, right? You don't need to be
Yeah.
attached to the same person for the rest of your life, and it's actually healthy, especially if you're happy as a senior engineer, happy as a manager, to move context, right? To change one of the 4 Ps, right? You need to change the platforms, the technology, you need to change the process that you work with, right? You need to change the product, the domain, right? You need to change also the people. I think like
Yeah.
you get so attached to work with the same set of people that you don't even realize what skills you're missing because those people are so good in some areas that you don't even have the need to kind of develop those skills, and that's a
Yeah.
problem for you as a kind of like as a professional. You need to be well rounded, right? You need to be able to work in completely different scenarios because the more you do that, the more valuable you be and the more adaptable you be. So in case of a layoff, in case you kind of like you're so confident that you kind of like you don't have this worry that like, oh, if I get fired tomorrow, I'm gonna be in trouble. You're so kind of like confident that like I can move. I have so many
Yeah.
skills that kind of like I'm not worried about. And I think that also is gonna make you take more risks and like to be more bold. I mean, more assertive in things. Like that, if you are afraid, you're gonna be. It's like it's almost like those are the things that are gonna allow you to grow faster because in order to grow faster, you need to take risks. You need to say no to people. And if you're kind of like on a vulnerable situation, which like I recognize most of us are at the beginning of our careers when you're still trying to build some safety net, it's hard to make those calls. It's hard to be yourself. It's hard to do what you believe. But once you kind of like are 10, 15 years in tech, you should have a safety net in both skill set and money that you can kind of like take more bets pretty much.
Yeah. Love this advice and love the advice of being intentional about understanding what you're vulnerable about and trying to fight this. And I think, when you're more of a technologist, and you write a lot of software, I think it's easier to understand that you are maybe more tied to a specific tech stack, a specific technology, and then that is a
And you have to.
vulnerability. And you have to definitely. I think it's harder to recognize that also everything else, relationships on the job, your soft skills, the way you do things, the processes at their company are also things you're tied to and make you lazy. Maybe, you're used to having those relationships for many years. You're a little bit, rusty if it was that you had to work on a new team. You get used to work on those specific processes. Those are all vulnerabilities as well. And so what may work in a company might not work in another. And so I think the advice of, getting more interviews and talking with other companies, I think it's a good one about careers for any person in tech. And you kept mentioning your 4P framework, which is a great one about how people should think about their career in tech. So I would love for you to explain it more in detail, because it's one of my favorites.
Awesome. Yeah, let's definitely talk more about that. Let me just get back to one thing you
Yeah,
said, and I think that's really important. There are two things actually. One is I think early in your career you need to be attached to a particular technology. You need to have this commitment of going with that for 2 to 3 years to master it, to be able to be productive in it. And I see a lot of junior engineers kind of spending months, if not years, debating should I go front end, back end, React, Angular, and they just move so much that they are not able to get to any meaningful level of fluency on any framework, right? And they almost they are the true kind of master of nones, right? What is
yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
the, the,
Jack of
the
all
true
trades.
kind of jack of all trades, and but jack of all trades is not that. The true jack of all trades is someone that goes deep to be proficiency and move and they're well-rounded, right? I think
Yes.
people use jack of all trades as a way to say that it's impossible to be full stack. So I think that's one point. And the second thing, the biggest accelerator of your career, and that's something that Fabio Kita, that's a really famous engineer and blogger in Brazil on the tech. He kind of helped to build the Rails community in Brazil. Had a fantastic blog post that when I read, I believe it was 2006, it changed my career. That was he said in the first 10 to 15 years of your career, you should be changing jobs every 3 years, right? If you're not changing jobs doesn't mean changing companies, but often it means changing companies, right? If you're staying on a particular company for more than 3 years early in your career, you're not gonna leverage the benefits that people that are rotating more, because every time you change company, you get uncomfortable, you have to onboard yourself, you have to learn again, right?
Yeah.
And changing jobs doesn't need to change companies. Yes, you can have completely different jobs inside the same company. There are people that are amazing, super successful there. And I think that's another piece of advice that's amazing. It's hard to do, is risky. People are gonna think you're crazy, right? Why you're leaving this such amazing job, such amazing company. But it's again the insurance policy for the future is your biggest accelerator, right?
Yeah.
Okay, now with that said, let me
Yeah.
go back to the four
No,
P's, right?
let me just tell something. It's, I know it's a tangent on a tangent, but when you said it's important you get deep into a framework, into your specific tech stack early on, I think one of the things that people sometimes misunderstand is that they feel like if I get too deep into Rails, for example, then I get tied forever to that framework. But in my experience, what I found is that getting very deep into a tech stack, into a framework, also makes it easier to get deeper into other frameworks.
Foundational skills.
Yes, because it informs you of what it means, to understand the internals of a framework, what matters, what you should pay attention to. So different tech is more similar than it is different.
As you
And
get deeper and deeper, you have more reusable skills. And if you go 5 levels deeper on Rails, on JavaScript, you're gonna get to exactly the same answer. Okay, how does it
yeah,
talk to the file system? How does it manage memory, right? And if you learn those foundational skills, and whenever you switch like stacks, you just ask the same questions. I think that's
yes.
is like is you have more and more applicable skills that are not visible at the surface level, right? If you look at
Yeah.
the surface level, it's like yes, it's like just acknowledge, just like the framework. If you actually are much deeper, you're kind of like you're getting to this like to the super low level things, and it's like and that's where the leverage is, and that's when you actually become a full stack. It's not
Yeah.
like stopping at the surface area. And I see a lot of people that are kind of like they're just users of the technology. They don't know what goes underneath. They never optimize something at the core. They don't understand how it works at the fundamental computer science level, and that's what kind of like doesn't allow them to grow. And that's the illusion of I'm always chasing the next programming language. I'm always chasing because like and they don't have that maturity to understand it's all pretty much the same. There's nothing here that's gonna change the game.
Yeah.
There's no kind of like silver bullets. Like, and it's like the same about AI. Is like if you understand deeply, it's like yes, there are a lot of amazing things that are coming up together now, but like the fundamentals were there, and if you kind of like go to understand the pieces, like I don't think we're like there's so many things to learn from this, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Back to your four piece. I'm sorry I
For peace. No, 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 no. This is
deviated.
great. I love going on tangents and taking turn lefts and turning rights and coming back to the road.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
so 4Ps, right? So 4Ps was a model that I got inspired by. Just to give some background. So when I was engineering manager back at American Express, I had this my boss that we were trying to come up with like what are the core responsibilities, what are the core areas of responsibilities of effective director in the company, right? And we came up with 7 at the time. Like, okay, your job as a director is to kind of like manage the platform, managing the systems, right? Then managing the product, and the product here could also mean the deliveries that you have, the processes, the platform, right? And then there was the partners, and there was paperwork too. I think like also your job as a manager is to manage the paperwork, so you don't have any trouble with regulations with HR, right? You need to do some paperwork to be successful. I end up like after iterating on this for a while, I end up like summarizing it mostly for managers. The initial version of the 4Ps was like, okay, what are the things that I need to be looking for, like to be successful as a manager? And like platform, like the P's, they're broad, right? So when I say platform, is not only platform in the sense of like the platforms you have, but it's like it's about the code bases, the technology, it's about like everything that is surrounding that realm of like platform, right? It's about
Yeah.
engineering at the sense, right?
Engineering. Yeah.
It's about technology use, like how reliable your system is, about monitoring. And when I say product, is also not only about the product itself, it's about the domain, it's about how the users use, it's about the UX, it's about like how you interact with business, right? It's like that whole like surrounding area around the product. And when I say about process, not only about Kanban versus Agile, it's also about what is your hiring process? What is your PR review process? What is your onboarding? It's about creating replicable things, right? To be predictable, to have a way of working, to be able to navigate. So like process side is also important as a manager. And finally, people, right? And people
Yeah.
here is like, yeah, you need to grow careers, you need to give feedback, you need to kind of like set goals, you need to be a good, like for example, meeting facilitator. Like you need to develop your soft skills, right? Like that's also on the people bucket. So like, and my initial idea when I developed the 4Ps, when it came up together with that, was like to have career conversation with managers to see you as a manager, you need to focus on this first P, this is the platform, because you're pretty good on processing and people, but you are neglecting the engineering side. So go a little deeper here, because I feel your team is struggling because you don't know what is the difference between a good architecture and not good architecture. You don't know if if a junior engineer is really ready for the next level, because you're so distant from the code base that you lost that most almost, right?
Yeah.
So, and then once I had that framework and we start to play it out with it on my teams at Amex, and I realized that that was also what was missing a lot of engineers, right? Like, and it almost, if you generalize to one level, in order to be a successful engineer and in order to grow not only on the management track, right, but also on the IC track, you need to understand those four pillars and you need to master each one of those. Because if you stay only on the platform, only on the engineering, the expertise, the language, you're not gonna be able to solve problems for the product. You're not gonna understand users, right? You're gonna be solving problems for the lack of itself. And I have
Yeah.
seen a lot of engineers that are kind of like they're optimizing for what they care about. They don't care if the app is looking shitty to the users or if the business is losing money on the stock
Yeah.
market because of something, right? Like they care like, is this really good like test? Do I have like a really fast build? And it's like, yes, I don't care too much if the animations are not looking great. Like there are people that optimize for one thing, then like they don't care if the other people on the team are happy with them. They don't care like so. And I noticed that a lot of the feedback, a lot of the people to grow, especially from like junior to mid level, like say mid level to like from junior to mid level, is clear that you don't need to be like. And I think that's another mistake that I see a lot of juniors that are trying to go to soft skills, go to like processes, toward, and I think that kind of is also a problem for them because they get penalized and they're not able to move to mid level because they're so
Mm.
distracted with everything. So from junior to mid level, focus on the first pillar, focus on engineering, focus on learning
On the
how to create
platform.
reusable components, right? That's out, but from mid level to senior, right? Or some companies have senior to lead engineer, right? That's a little different. The four P's are going to play a big role into your development to the next level because if you are able to mentor people, you're able to scale yourself. If you're able to create documentation, if you're able to scale processes, right? It's all about like leverage, right? The four P's. If you're able to talk to the PMs, talk to the business, you're gonna be able to find what is the real intent of a project, even if on the surface level it doesn't look like it's that important. Oh, why do I have this deadline here? Like I don't understand, I don't agree with this project, right? And
Yeah.
like the engineers that are able to go one level deep and to move in between these four pillars, right, are the ones that are more effective. And the more career conversations I had, the more 360 feedback and the more I used to see those people, it was clear that was always lacking, not necessarily on the engineering core computer science part, but on the other three. Of course, there are
Yeah.
people that need to be like to have more velocity, they need to be less perfectionist, right? And that's on the first pillar. But a lot of people, they are lacking the view from the outside in, and that's what makes them less effective, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's great that the framework is not just very clear about these definitions. It's also that it is a blueprint in in the sense that it it tells you you can go through these things kind of in order. You know, of course, it's not black or white, but at the very beginning, it's more about platform, your tech chops, understanding what you're working on the tech side, but then it's more about your impact, understanding the business, the product, and then just like before we talked about staff engineers needing to build organizations and managers needing to work on processes, it's more and more about process and people. So the two last piece.
Yes, yes. I think like that was another realization that I had is like early on your career, you kind of like you're focusing on the first two P's, right? Like you're
Mm.
focusing on platform and product because that's where, as I see, you can drive most of the impact. But later on, it's all about processes and people, right? It's about growing others, can take more, they can develop other people. It's about being an effective leader. It's about like trying to build things that are almost replicable that falls on standards is like so is and I think like there is another thing like even on the product side it's like almost like if you're able is like almost you go back and forth, right? It's almost like okay, you start to the platform, then you expand to product, then you go to process and people, then you come back and now you're building platforms that are much more powerful. They're like product platforms. They're going one level higher, and you go
Yeah.
to the business and you help to create new business units or new areas to the company, because you and then you apply again, then it's like, then you scale, then you go to
Yeah.
find people, so it's almost, you can go in loop, and like,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I think it is a meta framework,
No,
but I
it's like
think like it's
you can use it for career frameworks. You know, you can use these four pillars, and you can think at the various roles in your company and ask yourself, okay, what are the things that I expect this role to be to work on when it comes to platform, when it comes to process, people, how it changes, you know, with the various levels, with the various roles. So it's like you can create a matrix between your roles and
yes,
and
yes,
the piece.
it's amazing to do a self-reflection, and like, okay, you're planning the next, like your goals for the next year, right? Both as a manager or as IC, is a good way to like, let me look at the 360 and see what areas, like let me look at my feedback from my peers from like last year, and find, based on the kind of feedback in the areas that I'm struggling, where do I need to focus on, right? Is a good way to map it out. And there are other frameworks that like do similar things, right? Like, but I think is like at the high level is a good like, okay, this year is gonna focus on like this dimension in these particular skills that are in here, and it kind of like it's almost makes you step out of the tech bubble, the engineering bubble, right? And like look around, right? Business process, and find other things that you also need to do in order to be a successful professional, pretty much.
Yeah, no, this is great. So, well, we have some evergreen questions that we basically ask to every guest on the podcast, and one of them is about AI, of course, because we need to, and we have talked about careers pretty much today, and so my question is probably. Do you see that AI is changing or is going to change careers in some meaningful ways for ICs or for managers?
So I think like the thing that I'm most excited about AI, and I know this is not the question you're asking, is not necessarily about like generating code, autocomplete, like all the
Hmm.
like creating tests, but it's about have you heard about that book called the Your Code Base is Crime Scene?
No, I haven't.
I think like the thing that I'm most excited about is about understanding the complexity and make it obvious to find the hotspots, find the problems. Like it's almost to
Mm,
reverse engineer like diagrams from the code base, right? Is having
yeah,
different mental models to navigate the complexity of your code base, right? Like how things are related, how things dependence maps, like all those things that like, and the fact that you can ask with like a single question like, oh, can you explain what this function does, and you don't have to
yeah,
spend hours sometimes like, oh, what are
yeah,
those for loops here, and it's like it's so powerful for like for engineers to be able to do things faster and move faster, because it's almost like the understanding of the word is much easier to kind of like is paradigm shift on that way. So I'm really excited about
yeah,
the kind of the visualization and how those tools make, even if they're not precise on how they summarize, how they explain things, they make easier to navigate the complexity of the code base, and to be able to create things much faster as well, right? But I'm not. I don't think that those are going to be the things that we're going to use AI for. I think like navigating the complexity and how much an engineer can do by itself, right? The almost the output power of a particular engineer, right?
yeah,
Is what I'm really excited about. So I think like now going back to your question, I think that's gonna change in so many ways. Like one is like it's gonna be much easier to create startups. I feel like easier in one sense, like one person startups. I
yeah,
think are gonna be more and more common, right? Because you can create so much by yourself. You have so much more power now than you had. At the same time, there will be more like one person startups that are also doing the same, right? Like And so it's like it's so much easier to go from 0 to 1 now than it
Yeah,
was like five
true.
years back, right? Like, and I think that's the trend over the last like 2 3 decades, right? Like it's always being like with IDEs, Stack Overflow, internet, right? Like it's became easier and easier to create a software basically, right?
Yeah,
um
yeah,
so at the same time, I think the big companies, the big tech companies that have not been challenged over the last couple of years are going to start to face a lot of challenges in particular areas, right? Because of AI, because of a lot of like those people who are playing around, right? And
yeah,
as managers, I feel like it's so amazing to be able to also use tools to like summarize 360 feedback to kind of like sometimes you have to do a lot of work to understand like the particular issue, to prioritize the backlog, right? Like with AI you can get like thousands of user reviews and kind of find patterns. And like I think like there's so many, I mean so many different usages of that, right? That will
yeah,
change how we build software as an industry. I think that's like is more like is less about like the engineering, but it's more how it affects the dynamic of the product manager, the business analyst, right? Like the engineering manager, right? Maybe you have managers with like bigger orgs. Maybe the PMs will do will have to have broader scope. So you also change like the meta level. But I think at some point you still need people that are really experts and are going to be inspecting what the AI is generating,
yeah,
are going to be going against what is the AI is telling you to do, right? Or what has been
yeah,
done in the past, right? Because at some level, AI is just outputting like relationship between old knowledge, right?
yeah,
Things that have been is not going to be able to find a new pattern out of the blue, right? Of course, it can find relationships and can have a clue, but like that's where the really key people are going to play a big role,
yeah.
and I think like, unlocking AI.
No, it's really superpowers, and I agree with you that we focus too much on the creation side of AI superpowers. Maybe we call it generative AI, so it comes natural. But a lot of the benefits lie in the ability to summarize, explain, chat with the chatbot about things in your workspace. You don't even know where they are, and it explains it to you. So it makes people so much more productive. And I think it's easy, kind of easier to see what a super productive engineer looks like. I think it's less easy to understand what a super productive manager looks like. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that super productive manager means that they would be more hands-on and more technical, for example, or there would be less managers for number of engineers, maybe? Um,
What is a 10x manager? I think that's the
what
question,
is a
right?
10x manager? Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's really hard to say, but I would say like, what is a high performer manager, right? Like I think like the in I think they play with their strengths. So it's like in some sense, for some of those 10x's, or it will be like they go deep on the technical side. They
Mm,
kind of like they help on whiteboarding sessions. They kind of like they're able to find problems, right? And that's their kind of like that's their secret sauce, right? Pretty much, right?
mm,
For some others, it's about growing people. It's about kind of like setting expectations, like cultivating ownership, right? Like so. For others, it's working with business. For others, it might be to set process and to find things that will help the team to increase their cadence, right? For others, it's going to be to solve like almost conflicts that are between dependencies, right? But I think at some level, like most successful managers are really good communicators. They're really good at soft skills. They understand people. They understand their people to like a deep level, and they know like this person is going to be amazing at this person is not going to be excited about this, right? They know how to leverage people. They know how to sell things to the business, right? They're able to grow like platforms that's really hard. Like they're able to I mean, there are so many things. Like they are inspiring in so many ways, right? They not
Mm,
only sell ideas to the business, sell projects to the engineers. They know when to ask for more. They know like when it's time to let someone go. They don't. They have a really good conviction about like things, right? They're able to fight for the right things, to find exceptions, right? Like so I mean,
yeah,
there are so many things, right? But I mean, the opposite question would be easier. It's like what a bad manager looks like. What is someone that's like, and I think
yeah.
like you pretty much
So
take all that I said and you kind of reverse that, right? Like that's like so. But you need to find what is your secret sauce. Like almost like going back to the 4 Ps. Like where is like where are most of your strengths? What are the people are
mm,
telling that you do amazing? Like double down on those things, right?
yeah,
Especially if you have people that are able to keep covering the other dimensions to you,
yeah,
right?
yeah. It's true.
But will depend on the context. I think that's
Yeah, I agree. So, Thiago, thank you so much for this. We are wrapping up the interview, and I took so many notes while we were speaking, and it was a great chat. So, thank you again for being with us.
thank you, Luca. It was a pleasure, man. Appreciate the invite.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this chat valuable, you can subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the show. You can find all past episodes and learn more about the show at refactoring.fm. See you in the next episode.